The scent of dust and pipe smoke hung heavy in the air. The old man's boots struck the veranda with force, each step ringing out like a storm rolling in. Inside the modest timber cottage, a young woman knelt, struggling to tug her frock over a belly that no longer fit any cloth. Her name was Leela Mayfield, 20 years old, swollen with child and weighed down by guilt. Her cheeks were flushed from weeping through the night, her hair clung to her tear-dampened face, and outside, her father stood waiting. "Get up," his words sliced through the morning's warmth. Leela flinched, but rose. Her hands trembled as she tried to hide her stomach, but it was no use. The frock hugged her frame, tight around her waist, tighter around the life stirring within her. Her father, Amos Mayfield, spat a dark stream into the earth. "You've brought me nothing but shame." His voice was coarse, like sandpaper. He didn't meet her eyes, didn't see the girl who once wove daisies for him on quiet Sunday mornings. He saw only fault, and he was ready to cast it out. He pulled her toward a cart waiting by the rutted path. The sun was already scorching the sky. Leela stumbled as she climbed in, her breath shallow, the world tilting around her. She didn't ask where they were headed. She knew. A man had been spoken of the night before, an old rancher who lived deep in Redstone Hollow, far from town. They said he was half Titan, half Shadow, 60 years old, built like an ox, silent as stone. His name was Gideon Holt. The journey was long and harsh. Her father said nothing, didn't glance back. The donkey's hooves thudded steadily against the earth, the only sound in miles of heat and stillness. When they reached the crest, Leela saw him, a towering figure by a splintered fence, hat tipped low, arms crossed, a silhouette against the fiery sky. He looked too vast for this earth, too still to be flesh and bone. Her father leapt down and called out, "You still want the bargain, old man?" Gideon didn't stir at first, just gazed, slow and steady, then nodded once. "I'll take her," he said. Leela froze. Her father grabbed her wrist, pushing her forward like she was a bale of hay. "She can't cook, can't clean, can't keep quiet," he chuckled, dry as dust. "She's your burden now." And with that, he turned, climbed into the cart, and left her standing there. Dust swirled on the path behind him for a moment. She couldn't breathe. The air seared her throat, her knees quaked, her heart thumped so loud she thought it might shatter. Gideon finally spoke. "You'll stay in my lodge." His voice was deep, steady, like far-off thunder. Leela nodded faintly, her eyes brimming with tears she refused to let spill. She didn't know it yet, but that walk toward his lodge would change everything. The question was, would it save her life or ruin what little she had left? The lodge smelled of pine and old embers. It was small. One bed, one table, a stove that hummed with warmth. Leela stood in the doorway, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. Gideon walked past, his boots heavy and deliberate on the wooden floor. He pointed to a bench by the window. "You can rest there." She nodded, her hands cradling her belly. The room was still, save for the crackle of the fire. No yelling, no slamming doors, no voice calling her a failure. For the first time in months, no one told her what she'd destroyed. She sat, the old cushion creaking under her weight. Her body sank into it like a pebble in a stream, and she felt a strange pang in her chest. It wasn't fear, it was relief. Gideon filled a tin mug with water and set it beside her. "Drink," he said. His voice wasn't warm, but it wasn't harsh either, just steady. She lifted the mug with both hands, sipping slowly, her eyes flickering toward him now and then. He was massive, shoulders like a barn wall, beard flecked with silver, eyes dark and unreadable. Yet something about him felt safe, like the ground beneath her had finally stopped trembling. When he turned to leave, she found her voice. "Why did you take me?" He paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame. Then he said, "Because someone had to. I saw a girl left to die once, long ago, and I never forgave myself for turning away. And just like that, he stepped out into the sun, leaving her with a heart she didn't know how to hold. That night, sleep wouldn't come. She lay curled under a rough wool blanket, listening to the fire pop and the crickets hum outside. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face, cold, unyielding. But when she opened them, she saw the glow of Gideon's fire, warm, simple. The two faces tangled in her mind until tears came without warning. By morning, the aroma of bacon and cornbread filled the air. Leela blinked awake to see Gideon at the stove, a faded shirt clinging to his broad back, sleeves rolled up, moving slow and careful. He didn't speak, just nodded toward the table. "You can eat if you want." Her stomach rumbled loud enough to make her flush. She edged closer, sat, and took a bite. It was warm, soft, real. Something cracked inside her then, not from pain, but from remembering what kindness tasted like. She looked up at him, her voice small. "You don't even know me." Gideon sat across from her, eyes calm as still water. "I don't need to." He took a slow bite, then added, "You've been hurt enough. Rest while you can." Leela didn't reply. She couldn't. Her throat was too tight. She only knew one thing. For the first time in her life, someone looked at her and didn't see disgrace. They saw a person. But what Leela didn't know was that peace in the Wild West never lasted long, and the first storm was already brewing. Days in Redstone Hollow drifted slow, like the breeze itself had no place to rush to. Leela's body still ached, her ankles swollen, but her heart was starting to breathe again. Gideon worked outside most mornings, splitting logs or mending fences, while she watched from the veranda. Sometimes he'd glance up just to make sure she was still there. No words, no smiles, just a quiet look that said, "You're safe." She began to hum again, soft melodies her mother used to sing while pinning clothes to the line. Each day she scratched a mark on the wall, counting the mornings that passed without a harsh word. Every silent sunrise felt like a wound healing. Slow, but real. She talked more too, mostly about the past, about the meadows where she used to run barefoot before her father's voice turned every evening into judgment. Gideon never cut her off. He listened like every word carried weight. And maybe, for the first time, it did. In the evenings, he'd bring her tea brewed from wild sage and honey. She'd cradle the mug close to her chest, letting the warmth seep into her bones. Gideon would sit on the veranda rail, hat tipped back, eyes on the fading light. They didn't talk much, but the silence felt alive, not empty. There was peace in that small lodge, built from weathered timber and second chances. One night, as the crickets chirped and the fire snapped, Leela whispered, "Do you think I'll be a good mother?" Gideon didn't look at her, just stared into the dark. "I think folks who've been hurt the worst often love the deepest." She looked down, her eyes brimming with tears she tried to hide. He added softly, "You already protect that child like she's treasure. That's all that matters." From that night on, she started to believe him. The shame that once stuck to her like tar began to loosen. When she laughed, it wasn't cautious anymore. It was real. The lodge started to smell like life again. Bread baking, coffee in the morning, wood smoke at dusk. Even the walls seemed warmer, as if they too were learning what love sounded like. But deep down, Leela knew peace in this land never came free. The wind was shifting. Something was coming. Something that could shatter everything she'd just begun to build. So, before the storm hits, let's take a slow breath together. Grab your mug of tea, lean back, and listen close. And while you do, tell me this in the comments. What time is it where you are? And where in this wide world are you listening from? And hey, if you want to stay with Leela and Gideon a little longer, go ahead and tap that subscribe button. It helps more than you know, and I promise the next part will hit you right in the heart. Summer's heat had turned sharp in Redstone Hollow.
The air was dry enough to split your lips and make every sound carry. Leela sat on the veranda, her belly round and full of life, rocking gently while Gideon repaired a broken gate. The rhythm of his hammer was steady, comforting, like a heartbeat she could trust. That's when she saw it, a cloud of dust rising in the distance. Her hands froze mid-air. It wasn't the wind, it was riders. 2 horses, maybe 3. Gideon noticed 2. He set the hammer down, eyes narrowing. Minutes later she saw him, her father, Amos Mayfield. Same hat, same hard stare, same bitterness that used to choke their home like smoke. He stopped at the gate, boots grinding into the dirt, mouth twisted with disgust. "You found yourself a fine hiding spot, girl." His words cut through the quiet. Leela stood, her whole body shaking. Gideon stepped forward, calm as ever. "She's where she chooses to be." Amos spat into the dirt. "She's carrying sin, not life. Hand her over, old man." Gideon didn't budge. His hands rested easy on his belt, voice low but heavy. "You're standing on my land, Amos. Mind how you speak." One of the riders behind Amos laughed. "Ain't you too old to play hero, Holt?" Gideon glanced at him once, then reached for the rifle leaning by the veranda rail, not fast, not loud, just sure. He held it with one hand, barrel down, calm as a Sunday morning. Leela's heart raced. She could feel the baby shift inside her, as if the child itself sensed danger. "Papa, please!" Her voice broke on the wind, but Amos's eyes burned colder. "You think this old fool can protect you?" Gideon finally spoke. "I won't say it again. Leave." The young rider smirked, reached for his pistol. Before he could blink, Gideon fired into the dirt at his boots. The shot cracked through the hollow like thunder. The man stumbled back, cursing. The other horse spooked and reared. For a moment, no one breathed. Gideon lowered the rifle, his voice staying even. "I said, leave." Amos looked to the men beside him, but their eyes dropped fast. They'd heard tales of Gideon Holt, the giant of Redstone Hollow who once sent a gang of cattle rustlers running without firing a second shot. Amos glared, rage and shame mixing on his face. He turned his horse with a sharp yank, dust kicking up behind him. The riders followed, vanishing over the ridge without another word. When the silence returned, Leela's knees buckled. Gideon caught her before she fell. "You all right?" She nodded weakly, tears sliding down her cheeks. He would have taken the baby. Gideon looked toward the horizon. "He won't come back soon." Then softer, "But he will come back." The world was quiet again, but it wasn't the same. Peace felt fragile now, like glass under strain. Deep in her chest, Leela knew the storm wasn't over yet, because the next time her father came, he wouldn't come to talk. That night, the wind wailed outside the lodge like it was trying to warn them. Leela's pain came in waves, sharp and deep. The baby was coming early. Gideon cleared a space near the fire, spread out blankets and boiled water with hands that shook only once. He remembered the old midwife from years ago, the one who taught him how to keep a woman breathing through the pain when his own wife nearly died in childbirth. He'd seen storms, broken bones, men die in his arms. But he'd never seen anything like this. A young woman fighting for life, crying not from fear, but from a strength she didn't know she had. "Look at me." His voice was steady, his eyes locked on hers. "You're safe, Leela. Just breathe." She gripped his arm, sweat on her brow, tears mixing with the dust. "I can't." "Yes, you can. You already have." Hours passed. The fire burned low. Then, at last, the sound came. A cry. Small, but beautiful. Gideon lifted the child, his rough hands trembling. "It's a girl." Leela's body sank with relief. Her eyes searched his face, afraid to believe it. He placed the baby in her arms. "She's perfect." Leela wept, not from pain this time, but from knowing the world had given her back something she thought was lost forever: hope. Her arms, once mocked for being too soft, too heavy, now held everything that mattered: a tiny heartbeat that would never know shame the way she had. 3 days later, as dawn broke over Redstone Hollow, a rider came again. Amos Mayfield. He didn't shout this time. He just stood at the gate watching the lodge glow with new life. Leela stepped outside, the baby in her arms. Her voice was calm, steady, fearless. "I'm not your burden anymore." Her father looked away first. For a moment, his eyes fell on the baby, and something in his face fractured. Maybe he saw his late wife there, or the part of himself he'd buried long ago. Gideon stepped forward, his voice quiet but sharp. "She's my family now. You want to take something? You try." Amos turned his horse, rode off into the dust, and never returned. Weeks passed. Spring pushed through the dry earth. Leela planted wildflowers by the veranda, and Gideon carved a cradle from cedar wood. The lodge that once felt empty now rang with laughter, smelled of milk and bread, and echoed with tiny giggles that made the walls feel alive. Leela had been cast aside once, but she learned something no one could take away. You are not what they call you. You are what you choose to become. And sometimes, life doesn't break you to end you. It breaks you open so you can finally grow. Now, if you've stayed with this story until here, take a deep breath. Ask yourself, have you ever judged someone for their weight, their scars, or their past? Or have you ever been the one fighting to be seen? What would you have done if you were Leela? Go ahead and tell me in the comments. I read every one of them, and your stories matter. And if this tale touched your heart, tap that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story from the Wild West. Now, pour yourself a cup of tea, look out your window, and tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Because sometimes a good story finds you exactly when you need it.